What if I told you that there's a love story so powerful, a friendship so loyal that it literally changed the course of history? What if I told you about a woman who walked away from safety, from wealth, from everything, just to stand by her friend in the darkest hour imaginable? And what if I told you that this woman's final choice, her refusal to betray the person she loved most, led to one of the most brutal deaths in all of recorded history? This isn't just another tale of royal drama. This is the story of Marie Thérèse Louise of Savoy-Carignano, a woman whose courage was so extraordinary that even her executioners would later admit they had never seen anything like it. Her story will challenge everything you think you know about loyalty, friendship, and what it truly means to love someone unconditionally. But before we dive into this incredible journey together, I want to invite you to become part of our growing family here. If this story moves you the way it has moved me, please take a moment to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Now, close your eyes and imagine the golden autumn light streaming through the tall windows of a Turin palace in 1749. In the nursery of the House of Savoy, a baby girl takes her first breath, completely unaware that her life will become one of history's most heart-wrenching tales of love, loyalty, and ultimate sacrifice. This tiny infant, born on September 8, 1749, would grow up to walk the marble halls of Versailles, become the closest friend of France's most famous queen, and face an ending so brutal that even her enemies would later weep for her. But her story begins in the peaceful Duchy of Savoy, in a palace where intellectual curiosity was valued as much as noble blood. Little Marie Thérèse was no ordinary child. While other noble children played with expensive toys imported from Paris, she could be found curled up in her father's extensive library, completely absorbed in books that would challenge grown men. Her blonde hair, so lustrous it seemed to catch and hold sunlight, would cascade down to her feet when she forgot to tie it back while reading. Servants would find her there hours later, still lost in the worlds created by Dante, Machiavelli, or the romantic Italian poets whose verses she would memorize and recite with perfect emotion. Her tutors marveled at this delicate girl, who spoke Italian, French, and German with perfect fluency by age 10, and could discuss philosophy, history, and literature as if she were chatting about the weather. She devoured the works of Voltaire and Rousseau, built her own impressive personal library, and showed an early fascination with the mystical arts that would later define her adult interests. Her parents, Louis Victor of Carignano and Christine of Hesse-Rheinfels-Rotenburg, watched their daughter bloom into an intellectual beauty, never imagining that her very sensitivity and intelligence would one day make her a target. But there was something else remarkable about young Marie Thérèse that set her apart from other noble children: her extraordinary compassion. Even as a child, she would slip away from palace festivities to visit the kitchens, where she would sit with servants' children and listen to their stories. She learned early that behind every face was a human story worth hearing, a lesson that would shape her entire approach to life. The peaceful years of childhood have a way of ending abruptly when you're born into royalty. In 1767, when Marie Thérèse was just 17, her fate was sealed by something as simple as a painted portrait. Far away in France, the Duke of Penthièvre was worried about his son, the Prince de Lamballe, who needed a suitable wife. The Duke approached King Louis XV for help, and the king suggested the Italian princess with the remarkable reputation for both beauty and intelligence. A portrait was commissioned and sent to France. Imagine this young woman sitting perfectly still as an artist captured her likeness, having no idea that those brushstrokes would determine the entire course of her life. When the Prince de Lamballe saw her image, the decision was made. Her childhood was over, and she would soon become part of the most dangerous and glittering court in Europe. The journey from Turin to France in the winter of 1768 was treacherous, taking weeks through snow-covered mountain passages. Inside her carriage, wrapped in furs and silks, sat a terrified 17-year-old girl who was about to meet her husband for the very first time. When the carriage finally rolled to a stop at Montereau, the door opened to reveal a young man holding a beautiful bouquet of winter flowers, smiling nervously. This awkward, sweet moment was their entire courtship. Hours later, on January 31st, 1768, in the intimate chapel of Château de Nangy, Marie Thérèse became the Princesse de Lamballe. Candlelight flickered across ancient stone walls as two teenagers who barely knew each other promised to love and honor until death do them part. For a brief, shining moment, she believed in fairy tales. Her new husband seemed kind, their conversations were pleasant, and she dared to dream of love growing between them. The Duke of Penthièvre, her new father-in-law, welcomed her with unprecedented generosity. As the richest man in France, he showered his new daughter-in-law with diamonds and jewels that would have taken pages to catalog properly. Based on today's values, her wedding gifts were worth approximately £83,300 sterling, a fortune that represented more wealth than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. He also provided a dowry of 60,000 livres and promised her an annual income of 30,000 livres for life if her husband should die, plus additional provisions worth 75,000 livres. But the court of Versailles was no place for innocent dreams or fairy tale endings. Within months of their marriage, Marie Thérèse discovered the dark reality of aristocratic life. Whispers reached her ears about her husband's nights spent in the notorious gaming houses of Paris, about his laughter in rooms where wives were not welcome, about actresses who knew him far better than his own wife ever would. The young woman who had filled her mind with romantic poetry now found herself living in a story with no happy ending. Prince Louis Alexander de Bourbon-Penthièvre was not a cruel man, but he was weak, easily influenced, and utterly unprepared for the responsibilities of marriage. He had inherited not only his father's wealth, but also the casual attitude toward fidelity that was commonplace among French nobility. For him, marriage was a duty. Pleasure was found elsewhere. Marie Thérèse would sit by her window overlooking the magnificent gardens of Versailles, watching the sun set on both the day and her marriage, feeling more alone than she had ever imagined possible. The books that had once been her escape now seemed to mock her. All those love stories, all those tales of faithful devotion, and here she was, married to a man who had already forgotten his wedding vows. But even in her heartbreak, Marie Thérèse began to show the extraordinary character that would define her entire life. Instead of raging or seeking revenge, she chose dignity. Instead of hatred, she chose to understand. She began to see her husband not as a villain, but as another casualty of a system that prioritized duty over love, appearance over authenticity. Then came 1719, bringing with it a tragedy that would reshape her completely. Her husband, still barely out of his teens, fell gravely ill with syphilis contracted during his affairs. The same disease that was ravaging the ranks of European nobility had claimed another victim, and this time it was personal.
In those final, desperate weeks, something remarkable happened. Despite his betrayals, despite her shattered dreams, Marie Thérèse chose forgiveness over bitterness. She moved her bed into his chamber and sat by his bedside day and night, reading to him from the books she loved, caring for him with a tenderness that amazed everyone who witnessed it. When the servants whispered about why she would show such devotion to a man who had caused her such pain, she simply said that he was her husband, and that was enough. She held his hand as he died on May 6, 1768, barely 21 years old, leaving her a widow before she had truly learned to be a wife. But from this devastating loss came an unexpected blessing. The Duke of Penthièvre, watching his daughter-in-law care for his son with such grace, saw in her the daughter he had never had. He invited her to make her permanent home at Rambouillet, and together they embarked on a mission that would transform both their lives and the lives of countless others. The Duke was already famous throughout France as the King of the Poor for his generous charitable works, but Marie Thérèse brought something special to their partnership. She had a woman's intuitive understanding of suffering, having experienced such profound loss herself. She didn't just distribute money to the needy, She listened to their stories, held their children, and brought comfort to corners of France that nobility usually ignored. In village after village, she would arrive unannounced, often traveling in simple clothes rather than aristocratic finery. She would sit in humble cottages, share meals with peasant families, and learn about their struggles firsthand. Soon, she earned her own beautiful title that would follow her to the grave, the Angel of Penthièvre. People would literally weep when they saw her approach, not from fear, but from relief. Here was nobility that actually cared, wealth that was willing to share, power that was used to protect rather than exploit. She made a choice during these years that would define the rest of her path. Despite her youth and beauty, despite the pressure from family and friends, she decided never to remarry. In an age when women were valued primarily for their ability to produce heirs, Marie Thérèse chose to be measured by her compassion instead. This decision scandalized many at court, but freed her to dedicate herself completely to charitable work and the intellectual pursuits she had always loved. The years passed peacefully, filled with charitable work and quiet contemplation, until 1770 brought a young Austrian archduchess to Versailles. Marie Antoinette arrived as a 14-year-old bride, frightened and homesick, desperately needing someone who could understand the loneliness of royal life. Perhaps it was destiny, or perhaps it was simply the natural attraction between two gentle souls that Marie Thérèse and Marie Antoinette discovered in each other exactly what they had both been missing. Their friendship bloomed like roses in the Versailles gardens, bringing joy back into Marie Thérèse's life in ways she had forgotten were possible. Marie Antoinette saw in the slightly older princess a steady, calming presence, someone who had survived terrible loss and emerged with grace intact. Marie Thérèse found in the vivacious young queen a spark of happiness she thought she had lost forever when her husband died. They would spend hours together, walking in the gardens, sharing books, and talking about everything from fashion to philosophy. When Marie Antoinette became Queen of France in 1774, she immediately appointed her dearest friend as superintendent of the Queen's household, a position of tremendous honor and responsibility that had been dormant for years. Marie Thérèse accompanied the Queen everywhere, from intimate evening conversations to grand state occasions, becoming not just her closest advisor, but truly her sister of the heart. But there were mysterious sides to Marie Thérèse that few people knew about. In the sophisticated salons of Paris, mysticism and supernatural studies were as popular as politics and gossip. The princess found herself drawn to these hidden realms, perhaps searching for answers to life's cruelties in ancient wisdom and spiritual practices. She became deeply involved in Freemasonry, joining the adoptive lodge called La Candeur, and eventually rising to become Grand Mistress of the prestigious Mère Lodge Écossaise d'Adoption. This wasn't mere dabbling. She corresponded regularly with famous fortune-tellers like Madame Lenormand and the astrologer Mrs. Williams, studied the mystical arts with serious dedication, and hosted seances at her private residences. Was she seeking meaning in the mystical arts, or was she somehow preparing herself for the darkness she sensed approaching? Her close friends noticed that she had an uncanny ability to sense impending tragedy, often becoming melancholy for no apparent reason before bad news arrived. Whatever her reasons, these interests revealed a depth and complexity that made her far more than just another pretty face at court. The 1880s brought changes that would shake French society to its very foundations. Poor harvests led to severe bread shortages, and hungry people began looking desperately for someone to blame for their suffering. Marie Antoinette, with her Austrian birth and expensive tastes, became the perfect target for their rage. They called her La Trécienne, the Austrian woman, as if her birthplace made her less worthy of French loyalty. Marie Thérèse watched with growing alarm as her beloved friend became a symbol of everything people believed was wrong with their country. She tried gently to counsel the Queen toward greater awareness of her subjects' suffering, suggesting charitable works and public appearances that might improve her image. But Marie Antoinette was still young, and youth often believes itself protected from consequences. Meanwhile, Marie Thérèse quietly increased her own charitable activities, using her wealth to establish soup kitchens in Paris and supporting struggling families throughout France. She hoped that by demonstrating genuine concern for the people's welfare, she might somehow shield her friend from the growing storm of resentment. The storm that had been building for decades finally broke in 1789. The Estates General convened for the first time since 1614. The tennis court oath was sworn by angry representatives, and on July 14th, the Bastille fortress fell to enraged crowds. While many at court still lived in denial, Marie Thérèse understood with crystal clarity that their world was ending, and ending violently. When the royal family was forced to abandon the splendor of Versailles for virtual imprisonment in the Tuileries Palace in Paris, Marie Thérèse could have easily fled to safety. Many nobles were already escaping to England, Austria, Prussia, anywhere but revolutionary France. She did travel to England in 1791, meeting with King George III and Queen Charlotte in a desperate attempt to secure help for her friend. But when the English king refused to intervene, coldly stating that the French royal family had brought their troubles upon themselves, Marie Thérèse faced the most important decision of her entire life. She could stay in England, safe and comfortable, living peacefully while her friend faced unknown dangers alone, or she could return to France, knowing she might be walking into her own death.
King Louis XVI himself wrote to her begging her not to come back. "The situation has become too dangerous," he warned. "Stay away and live." But Marie Thérèse's response revealed everything about the extraordinary woman she had become through all her trials and losses. "The Queen needs me," she wrote back, "and I must live or die by her side." She carefully wrote out her will at Aix-la-Chapelle, thoughtfully providing even for her beloved dogs, a detail that shows her gentle nature persisting even in the face of almost certain doom. She left specific instructions for the care of her pets, arranged for the payment of her servants, and distributed her remaining wealth among various charitable causes. Then she returned to France, fully understanding that she was probably returning to die, but unable to abandon the friend who meant more to her than her own life. August 10, 1792, marked the official end of the French monarchy, and with it, any hope of mercy for those who had served it faithfully. Marie Thérèse was arrested and imprisoned, first in the Temple prison alongside Marie Antoinette, then transferred to the grim La Force prison, where conditions were deliberately harsh and degrading. The contrast between her former life and her current circumstances was staggering. The woman who had once hosted elegant soirees and magnificent palaces now shared a damp cell with common criminals. The hands that had once worn diamonds worth a fortune were now chained with iron. Yet witnesses reported that she never complained, never begged for better treatment, and never expressed regret for her decision to return. In those final, terrible days, she could still have saved herself. Her captors offered her a choice that seemed almost reasonable. Simply denounce the monarchy, publicly reject her friendship with Marie Antoinette, swear loyalty to the new republic, and she would be allowed to live quietly and safely. For a woman who had already endured so much, who had shown such incredible forgiveness and resilience throughout her life, this might have seemed like a small compromise to make for survival. After all, what good could she do anyone if she were dead? But Marie Thérèse had spent 42 years making choices based on love and loyalty rather than convenience and self-preservation. She had forgiven her husband's betrayals and cared for him until death. She had devoted herself to serving the poor and forgotten. She had stood by her friend through every scandal and danger. She would not betray her principles now when it mattered most. On September 3, 1792, she was brought before a mock tribunal at La Force prison. The trial was a farce designed to provide a thin veneer of legality to predetermined murder. She was asked to state her name and position, then questioned about her knowledge of alleged plots by the royal family. "I don't know if there were plots on August 10th, but I know I have no knowledge of them," she replied calmly. Then came the crucial moment. The interrogator told her to swear allegiance to liberty and equality and hatred to the king, the queen, and royalty. Marie Thérèse's response would echo through history. "I would gladly swear the first, but not the second," since it is not in my heart." Two quiet sentences that signed her death warrant, but preserved her soul. After a few minutes of deliberation, the head of the tribunal pronounced the coded death sentence: "Release Madame." She was led to a door which opened into a courtyard, one full of freshly slaughtered bodies piled on the ground. As she cried out in horror, one of the killers struck her on the head with a pike. She fell and was quickly hacked to death with sabers. But the true horror was yet to come. Her head was severed and mounted on a pike, carried through the streets like some grotesque trophy of revolutionary justice. Then came the final, unthinkable cruelty. The mob, drunk on violence and eager to inflict maximum psychological torture, carried their grisly prize to the temple prison, where they forced Marie Antoinette to look upon what remained of their dearest friend. It was a deliberate act of emotional destruction designed to break the queen's spirit completely before her own inevitable execution. Marie-Thérèse Louise de Savoy-Carignano, Princesse de Lamballe, died at 42 years old, having lived a life marked by profound loss, unwavering loyalty, and ultimately, unimaginable courage. She could have fled to safety, could have denounced her friend, could have chosen survival over principle. Instead, she chose to stand by someone she loved, knowing exactly what it would cost her. Her death marked one of the darkest moments of the French Revolution, shocking even hardened revolutionaries. In the months and years that followed, many who had participated in or supported the September massacres expressed regret and horror at what had been done. The woman they had branded as an enemy of the people was remembered instead as someone who had dedicated her life to helping those same people. In our modern world, we often celebrate those who look out for themselves first, who prioritize self-preservation above all other considerations. But Marie-Thérèse represents something much rarer and more precious, a soul who believed that some bonds are stronger than the fear of death, that loyalty and love are worth any sacrifice, that keeping faith with those we care about matters more than keeping ourselves safe. Her story continues to move us because it speaks to something eternal in the human heart, the power of faithful friendship and the courage to stand by our deepest convictions when everything else falls away. In a world that often feels increasingly divided and selfish, her example of loyalty unto death offers us a different way to measure the worth of a life. Today, if you visit the gardens of Versailles, you can imagine her walking among the roses with Marie Antoinette, two friends sharing dreams of a kinder world. The magnificent palace still stands, but it no longer witnesses the gentle presence of the woman who once walked those marble halls, reading poetry in the morning sunlight and choosing love over hatred, loyalty over life itself. Perhaps her true monument exists not in stone or marble, but in the eternal reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, there are those who choose light over darkness, love over hatred, and loyalty over life itself. She showed us that sometimes the greatest victory is not in surviving, but in remaining true to who we are and what we believe, no matter the cost. Thank you for allowing me to share Marie-Thérèse's incredible story with you today. Her courage and devotion continue to inspire me every time I think about her choices, and I hope her example has touched your heart as deeply as it has mine. Please let me know in the comments what you think you would have done in her impossible situation. And if you'd like to discover more forgotten stories of remarkable women throughout history, I warmly invite you to subscribe and join our growing community of people who believe these stories matter and deserve to be remembered. Until we meet again for another journey into the past, remember that every single life has the potential for extraordinary meaning, sometimes found not in what we achieve for ourselves, but in what we're willing to sacrifice for those we love.